Before me is a set of parts sent over by Razer to build in their new ITX case, the Tomahawk. Now I'm going to give you one very good reason why you should stick around to the end of this video, because when I'm done building this system and testing out, I get to give this exact one away to one of you guys. So make sure you're subscribed and stick around to the end of the video to learn more about that. But for now, let's talk about the parts. Now, like I said, Razer sent over all of the parts here specifically for me to build in their new case, and since they sent them all over, I should probably talk a little bit about it. Like I said, this is the Razer Tomahawk, the ITX version, and it's actually really nice. It's an incredibly premium case. Take a look at the pricing with the links in the description down below, by the way. Yeah, it's definitely on the more expensive side, but it does kind of live up to that. It's tempered glass on both sides and steel everywhere else. It has basically every panel removable besides the floor and the back panel, so that you can get really easy access to build, well, in it pretty easily, and you can fit, full-size graphics cards. You do have to use an SFX power supply, and it's not the smallest ITX case, but it does have quite a lot of room for, airflow and even radiators if you wanted to go water cooling in this thing, so it's a pretty decent shout. Now, as for the rest of the parts, Razer sent over an i5-10400F for our CPU. That's a chip I've reviewed before, the video will be up in the cards above, but suffice to say it's a decent 6-core chip that does pretty well for gaming and has reasonable productivity performance, at least in the grand scheme of things. Now, the motherboard that's going to sit in is an ASRock Z490 Phantom Gaming ITX board, which, because it's Z490, means the 3200MHz RAM that we've got, the G.Skill Trident Z, will actually work and actually run at 3200MHz. Amazing, I know. We've also got a Samsung 970 EVO Plus to throw in as our boot and games drive, and we're using an RTX 2060 Super from EVGA for our graphics. We do also have a Be Quiet ShadowRock TF2 to keep the CPU cool, and of course our SF600 to keep, well, everything powered. We've also got some Cryonaut thermal paste and some RGB fans, because of course we do. All in, the system would cost you around about £1,500, which I know is a fair bit for a locked i5 and a 2060 Super, but that's what we've got, so let's get building. So first things first, we need to install the CPU. That's pretty simple. You get your motherboard out, get the CPU out, and align the small gold triangle on one of the corners with the triangle that's on the CPU socket. Lift the arm up and lift the sort of carrier bracket up, place it in gently, put the carrier bracket back down, sliding it under the sort of locking screw, pull the arm down, and the cover plate should pop off, and it should hold your CPU in nicely. Next, we can install the RAM. Now, on this motherboard, you only need to open the tabs on the motherboard on the top side. The bottom ones are fixed, so line up the notch that's in the RAM stick with the notch that's in the slot and place it down into the slot, and make sure you hear a click from both sides. Repeat for the second DIMM, and that's our RAM installed. Our SSD is next. It's a pretty unusual position for an SSD to go in, especially if you're not used to building on ITX motherboards, but with this board, it goes on this little expansion card. We need to undo 2 screws that hold the heatsink to the sort of lower portion, and once those are out, we can undo the tabs, much like a RAM DIMM module, to pull the sort of card out. When we get the card out, we can remove the 2 screws for the heatsink, and then install the M.2 SSD like you would in any other motherboard, at a slight angle first, aligning the notch into the socket, push it all the way in, flat down onto the standoff, put the screw in, and then we can peel the cover off of the thermal pad, place the thermal pad down on top and the heatsink back down, screw it back in, place the card into the slot, make sure it seats nicely, and then put our 2 screws back in. And with that installed, that's pretty much our motherboard set and ready to go, at least for now anyway, so we can put it to one side and start working on the case. Now, the nice thing about the Tomahawk is that basically all of these panels come off. The side panels are just held in by magnets on the front, and sort of on, well, hinges at the back, they just lift off. The front and top panels are also just sort of clipped in, so you just give them a bit of a pull and they will come off nice and easily, which is great for access. You can also remove the top tray with a couple of screws for a radiator or fans, so we're going to remove that for even better access into the case. Once all of our panels are off, the first thing I'd probably do here is install the power supply. Now, sadly in this case, the way that they've mounted the power supply, at least to me anyway, doesn't make all that much sense. It's on a horizontal bracket, which is fine, except the horizontal bracket doesn't have any reliefs cut in the side for the power cable. So what happens is once you do install the power supply, which just sits on the bracket, screws in from the back like usual, and then plug in the pass-through power cable, well, that power cable rubs on the bracket that holds the power supply up. It also juts out quite far, which means CPU cooler compatibility is a little bit mixed, and we'll be coming onto that in a second. Either way, once the power supply is installed, you will want to attach the cables. You can do this from the backside, there is plenty of room. In our system's case, all we need is the 24-pin, an 8-pin for the CPU, and an 8-pin for the GPU. You don't actually need anything else, which is pretty sweet. Although if you did want to add any hard drives to this sort of build, which there are some spaces down at the bottom or technically in the back, although the one in the back, I probably wouldn't use that one as you really need that space for cable management. But either way, you could always add a SATA power connector if you needed to. Now with the power supply installed, we're going to install the motherboard. All of the standoffs are already set in here, and the motherboard that we're using has a rear I/O shield included and built onto it. So all we need to do is lower the board in and put the 4 screws in that hold it down, one pretty much on each corner. Once that's in, we can look to install the CPU cooler. Now I know that I said I was using a Be Quiet ShadowRock TF2, but unfortunately that one straight up doesn't fit in this chassis or on this motherboard, and so I've swapped to a Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim. This one just fits. I'll show you in a second, but it just barely fits, but it's also a really easy install. Especially with this cooler, it comes with basically the stock Intel mounting hardware, so all you do is put some of the thermal paste on, a grain of rice is fine, place the cooler down, and click it into place on all 4 corners. It will probably take a few attempts and you might need to really kind of force it, but once it's on, it stays on pretty well. Next up, before we install anything that's going to block our access like the graphics card, I'm going to route all of the case and power supply cabling. I'm going to plug in things like the 24-pin for the motherboard, the 8-pin up at the top left. I'm going to route the PCIe power down to the bottom so that we can use that for our graphics card later. And I'm going to install things like the USB 3 front panel header, the USB 2 front panel header that has to plug into the little add-in card, so be careful there. Also the HD audio header, which is kind of buried down in the back corner, so make sure that you route that cable and the USB one basically in front of the PCIe slot. You'll see what I mean. Okay. Fans decide to ramp up. Either way, you want to plug everything that you can see in, including even the front panel headers for the power and reset switch. Once everything is connected, we can install the graphics card. This is pretty easy. All you do is push the tab down on the motherboard, remove the 2 blanking plates that are on the back with the 2 screws that hold them there, offer the graphics card up and slide it into the slot until it clicks, and then put the 2 screws in the back, slide the little sliding cover back over and screw that down, and then connect our 8-pin power connector, and that's the graphics card installed. And as a final touch, we will need to install the fans, 1 on the back and 2 on the top. They just screw in with standard fan screws. You can either use the ones that come with the case, which are a little bit nicer, or the ones that come with the fans if you'd prefer. Now, wiring all this up and actually cable managing it is really important in this case. The reason for that is that especially the rear panel is only held shut by magnets and it's on a hinge. So if you have any level of resistance from your cables, it will pop itself open and stay open no matter what you do. Now, I did manage to basically crush, it was mostly the 24-pin, down flat enough so that this thing will stay closed. But if you are planning on getting one of these cases, make sure that you spend a lot of time cable managing really well, even going potentially so far as to get custom flat and easily or the right length cables for your system, because that will make a massive difference to how, well, easy this thing just physically shuts. And one last note on the case, the power and reset buttons, at least on my specific unit, are pretty difficult to press. In fact, the reset button is so far inset that it doesn't seem to actually, well, actuate the reset button, which is a little on the annoying side. There are definitely a couple of things that I would like to see changed about this case or revised slightly to make it a lot more of a refined and easy building experience rather than going for the sort of all-out aesthetic that they, I suppose, clearly have. Now with that said, that is the system built, so let's go and install Windows on it and throw some games on and take a look at the performance numbers. Now starting off with COD Modern Warfare, this was tested at high settings. COD doesn't really have a preset, so it's kind of ultra, high, normal, it's kind of a mix, but it's roughly in that range. Either way, this is a great system at 1080p, getting 131 FPS average. Even for 1440p, 84 FPS average is great. And of course, it's not really a 4K system, although if you did want to turn the settings down, getting 48 FPS even at sort of high settings is still pretty decent. Moving on to Fortnite, this is tested at epic settings, and again, it's a pretty similar result actually. This is with DirectX 12 enabled, but no DLSS or ray tracing features turned on, although you could turn them on if you want to. And you're getting 129 FPS average at 1080p, 84 at 1440p, and 42 at 4K. Although especially on the 1080p side, the 1% low numbers were actually really good and very impressive for Fortnite, as it tends to be a game that's pretty variable in its results. Now moving on to Watch Dogs Legion, this is a game that is notoriously difficult to run, and so I've been testing it at medium settings for the system. With that said, the medium settings get you a very playable experience at both 1080p and 1440p, which is not something that can be said about, well, quite a lot of even higher end graphics cards on higher ultra. Either way, you're looking at 86 FPS average at 1080p and 66 at 1440p, and if you did want to turn it down to low, you could probably get 4K gaming working there, but yeah. One thing that you definitely can't get working at 4K is probably Cyberpunk, as well. Even on ultra settings with no ray tracing, it does get around 70 FPS average at 1080p, which is certainly playable. You probably would want to turn the settings down just a little bit and get a slightly smoother, slightly more responsive experience, and especially if you're gaming at 1440p, that's definitely something that I would recommend, at least for now anyway. So I should expect from a 1040f and an RTX 2060 Super, it's a pretty decent experience. Especially at 1080p, you're going to have a very good time even on higher refresh rate monitors, and even at 1440p, it's still going to be a pretty decent experience. If you're willing to turn the settings down a little bit more from ultra to high, you're going to have a very good time, and if you're willing to go to more medium, then I'm sure that even 1440p high refresh rate isn't completely out of the realm of possibility. Of course, CPU workloads are still pretty important, so let's take a look at a couple of those. Now starting off with Cinebench, the single-threaded score here was pretty good at 431 points, and the multi-threaded score was nice at 3069. Now, the single-threaded score is pretty good, it's good for gaming as you've seen, although the multi-threaded score does let it down a little bit. In Blender, which is obviously a very heavily multi-threaded application, the BMW render took 4 minutes and 56 seconds, which is a good bit longer than, say, a 3600X might, and the Gooseberry render took just over 25 minutes. And of course, if you wanted to stream with this system, well, that's perfectly possible, especially if you use the NVENC encoder on the RTX 2060 Super instead of X264. Either way, this is a pretty decent and pretty nice system. There's some room for upgrades if you wanted to. The motherboard can definitely handle any chip you want to throw at it, and of course you can still fit pretty much any size graphics card, give or take, in this. The main downside will probably just be power delivery, as you have to use SFX power supplies, and this Corsair one only comes with 2 8-pins, so you need to modify your graphics card decisions based on what you can power. Either way, it's a pretty good system. Now we get to the bit that clearly everybody has been waiting for, me giving away this entire PC. Now, it's going to be nice and simple. There's a link in the description down below that you can visit to enter. I need to make it clear it's going to be limited to people in the UK and European residents, as shipping costs, especially for an entire computer, even a small one like this, are currently astronomical to anywhere but, here and into the EU. Otherwise, it's going to be a winner drawn at random, and I will send you an email asking for your delivery information. You have 48 hours to respond to that email, otherwise we will pick a new winner. And that's pretty much it. There'll be a couple of ways that you can enter, including checking out my channel and checking out the video and maybe retweeting a tweet if you're interested. But otherwise, that is pretty much that. It will run into the new year. That will be listed in the link in the description down below as well. So feel free to check out if you want a chance to win, and best of luck to everyone. So that's how to build a system like this. That's the parts and the performance, and that's how to win this very one. Thank you to Razer for supplying all of the parts and for shipping it to the eventual winners. And Merry Christmas to you guys. I hope you enjoy, well, the lucky person who wins this, hope you manage to enjoy the system. And for everyone else, I hope you have a great time. I hope you stay safe. And that's pretty much it. I've got plenty of other videos coming up in the coming days, weeks, and I'm really looking forward to 2021 and seeing what possibilities are available then. So yeah, stick around. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. Of course, there are plenty of links in the description down below if you want to support the channel. There's Patreon if you want to get access to our Money Men Discord chat, sponsor-free videos, and of course, support me directly. There's merch if you want some tasty TechteamGB hoodies or t-shirts like this one, or whatever else if you want to treat yourself for Christmas. Or there's also other like affiliate links for people like Amazon, Overclocks UK if you're buying from there. There's also VPN options and just a load of other stuff, so feel free to check it out. There will be some more videos over there, maybe some system reviews or build guides if you want to keep watching. And that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed it. Best of luck, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you on the next video.